Chapter 3: The Universe as a School. If reality is not fundamentally a prison, then what is it? The previous chapters propose that the limitations experienced within human existence may not be evidence of cosmic imprisonment. They may instead be part of a larger developmental structure. This leads to a more fundamental question. Why would consciousness need limitation in the first place? If consciousness is capable of infinite awareness, why would it enter a reality characterized by boundaries, uncertainty, forgetting, embodiment, and consequence? The answer proposed by this book is simple. Because development requires structure. Why limitation exists. Imagine trying to learn a skill in an environment where every possibility is available simultaneously. There would be nothing to distinguish one stage from another. No progression, no consequence, no discovery, no meaningful movement from ignorance to understanding. A human being develops precisely because experience is initially limited. A child does not possess the physical coordination, knowledge, emotional regulation, or conceptual understanding of an adult. These limitations are not defects in the educational process. They are the conditions that make education possible. The same principle may apply to consciousness. If consciousness entered physical existence with unrestricted access to every aspect of reality, every possible perspective, and complete knowledge of every consequence, then many of the experiences that produce development would lose their function. There would be nothing to discover because everything would already be known. There would be nothing to overcome because every capacity would already be available. There would be no meaningful uncertainty because every outcome would already be perceived. Limitation creates the space in which development can occur. Consciousness develops through structure. Structure gives experience consequence. The body creates one set of boundaries. The nervous system creates another. The environment creates another. Relationships, culture, language, memory, biology, and circumstance all contribute additional layers. Together, these structures create the particular field through which an individual experiences existence. This is why no two people experience exactly the same world. Reality may be shared, but perception is structured differently within every consciousness. One person experiences a situation as threatening. Another experiences it as exciting. One person encounters rejection and becomes defensive. Another encounters the same rejection and becomes reflective. The external event is only part of the experience. The structure of consciousness determines what that event means, what becomes visible within it, and what response becomes possible. In this sense, the curriculum is not simply what happens to us. It is the interaction between what happens and what we are currently capable of perceiving, understanding, and integrating. This is where limitation becomes developmental. A limitation reveals the boundary of present capacity. An obstacle reveals what has not yet been mastered. A recurring pattern reveals something that consciousness has not yet fully understood. And an unfamiliar possibility can reveal a capacity that is beginning to emerge. The necessity of not knowing. One of the strangest features of human existence is that we do not remember where we came from, where we are ultimately going, or why we are here. From one perspective, this appears to be a profound limitation. From another, it may be essential to the curriculum. Consider learning a story while already knowing every event that will occur. The information may still be acquired, but the experience of discovery disappears. Uncertainty creates participation. Not knowing forces consciousness to encounter the present moment rather than merely observe a predetermined sequence from a position of complete knowledge. This does not necessarily mean that forgetting is absolute, nor that every human experience has been deliberately programmed. It suggests a possibility. Perhaps partial awareness is itself part of the design. The limitation of perception creates the conditions through which perception can expand. The unknown becomes the space in which knowing develops. Why unrestricted awareness would bypass learning. If complete awareness were immediately available within ordinary human consciousness, many of the developmental mechanisms described throughout this book would become unnecessary. If we knew exactly why every person entered our lives, relationships would lose much of their uncertainty. If we knew the precise purpose of every difficulty, frustration would be transformed before it could reveal anything about our resistance. If we knew every consequence of every action in advance, choice would become closer to calculation than discovery. If we could perceive the complete structure of reality at all times, there would be little opportunity to develop the capacity to perceive it. This is the paradox of the curriculum. The limitation is part of what makes the lesson real. A person does not become courageous by being told that nothing can hurt them. Courage emerges when uncertainty exists and the person develops the capacity to move through it. Compassion develops when another person's experience is not completely transparent and must be understood. Wisdom develops when consequences are experienced rather than merely described. Discernment develops because perception is incomplete. Capacity develops because capacity is initially limited. The restriction is therefore not necessarily the enemy of development. It may be its precondition. Earth as curriculum. From this perspective, Earth takes on a very different meaning. It is not necessarily a cosmic prison designed to trap consciousness within suffering. It can instead be understood as a highly concentrated environment of experience. Here, consciousness encounters embodiment, relationship, desire, loss, attachment, uncertainty, responsibility, pleasure, pain, mortality, and change. These conditions create extraordinary friction, but friction creates information. We discover ourselves through what we resist. We discover our attachments through what we fear losing. We discover our assumptions through what challenges them. We discover our capacity through what initially appears beyond it. And we discover the limits of our understanding through experiences that refuse to fit neatly inside the worldview we previously held. Earth, therefore, does not need to be perfect to be purposeful. In fact, its imperfections may be precisely what make it useful as a developmental environment. The curriculum is not supposed to be comfortable. A school that never challenges its students would not produce much development. Likewise, a curriculum designed entirely around comfort would provide little reason for consciousness to expand beyond its existing structure. This does not mean that suffering should be romanticized. Pain is still pain, loss is still loss, trauma is still trauma. The curriculum model does not require us to pretend that difficult experiences are pleasant or that every tragedy can be easily explained. It proposes something more subtle. An experience can be painful without being meaningless. The developmental value of an experience may not be visible while it is occurring. Sometimes understanding comes years later. Sometimes it comes through a change in perception rather than a change in circumstance. And sometimes an experience may remain unresolved for a long time before consciousness becomes capable of integrating it. This is why the curriculum cannot always be judged from within a single moment. From punishment to participation. The prison planet model asks, why am I being subjected to this? The curriculum model asks, what is this experience revealing? The first question places consciousness primarily in the position of victim. The second places consciousness in the position of participant. That distinction is fundamental. If reality is fundamentally hostile, then liberation requires defeating or escaping whatever controls us. If reality is fundamentally educational, then liberation requires understanding. This does not eliminate responsibility for changing harmful circumstances. It changes the deeper reason for doing so. We do not move beyond limitation because the universe has wronged us. We move beyond limitation because consciousness has developed beyond what the limitation was capable of teaching. The school eventually becomes unnecessary. A student does not remain in the same classroom forever. The purpose of a lesson is not to preserve the lesson indefinitely. It is to develop the capacity that makes the lesson unnecessary. This provides the foundation for the idea of spiritual graduation explored later in this book. As consciousness expands, certain forms of friction may naturally dissolve. Patterns that once repeated no longer need to repeat. Perceptions that once required protection become unnecessary. Attachments lose their grip. And structures that once seemed restrictive become transparent. The boundary has not necessarily been destroyed. The consciousness that required the boundary has changed. This is the deeper meaning of liberation within the framework of this book. Liberation is not necessarily escape from the classroom. It is the development of consciousness to the point where the classroom no longer needs to function in the same way. Perhaps then, Earth is not a place from which consciousness must escape. Perhaps it is a place through which consciousness passes. A structured environment, a field of experience, a school whose lessons are written not on pages, but in relationships, circumstances, choices, consequences, limitations, and moments of awakening. And if that is true, then the question changes completely. We no longer need to ask, how do I get out of the prison? We can begin asking, what am I here to learn?